This was the longest time away, about 7 years away, from 339 to 346. And during that time there was a council of Sardica held by the other two emperors who appreciated Athanasius in order to declare him vindicated. And after several years, Constans threatened war on his brother Constantius if he didn't reinstate Athanasius in his bishopric. And so Constantius relented and he was back. And now he had 10 years of peace, basically. And in those 10 years, poured his life out, loving his people and defending the cause of truth in Alexandria. Then Constans was murdered in 350 AD, and that freed Constantius to go back to what he really believed and oppose Nicene theology and oppose Athanasius. And so he drove him out again, and this time it was very bloody. Let me read the account of the way they moved in on Alexandria and this bishop. On Thursday night, February 8, 356, Athanasius was presiding at a crowded service of preparation for a communion on the following morning in the church of Theonis, the largest in the city. Suddenly, the church was surrounded and the doors broken in, and just after midnight, Syrianus entered with an infinite force of soldiers. Athanasius calmly took his seat upon the throne in the recess of the apse and ordered the deacon to begin the 136th Psalm, the people responding at each verse, "For his mercy endureth forever." Meanwhile, the soldiers crowded up to the chancel, and in spite of entreaties, the bishop refused to escape until the congregation were in safety. He ordered the prayers to proceed, and only at the last moment, a crowd of monks and clergy seized the archbishop and managed to convey him in the confusion out of the church in a half-fainting state, but thankful that he had been able to secure the escape of his people before his own. From that moment, Athanasius was lost to public view for 6 years and 14 days. And just a few months later, the bloodletting was huge as they came in with vengeance to try to find Athanasius and to put to death and imprison those who had followed him. They forced a new bishop in. His name was George. Instigated a violent persecution. And at last the people lynched George and killed him because of their exasperation at the way the city and the bishops and the clergy were being treated. That was the mingling in those days of secular and ecclesiastical power. But at the darkest hour, there's a lesson here, at the darkest hour for Athanasius and for the cause of orthodoxy, the dawn was just about to break. The third exile, this third exile that he's just now been launched into for 6 years, proved to be the most fruitful of all of his times away. He had spent a lot of his time up till now in the peaceful seasons visiting the desert monks. He loved the ascetics, and they formed a bond of deep friendship, and they became his lifeline. Nobody knew where he was because the monks would never tell where he was. And that was absolutely crucial, and therefore, for these years, he wrote all of his major works, and half of everything in this volume was written during these 6 years in exile. The Arian history, tracts against Arians, To Serapion, on the councils of Arimian, the life of Anthony, and so on. To me, it is one of the great ironies of history that the triumph over Arianism would happen largely through the ministry of a fugitive living and writing inches from his own death. Here's the way Archibald Robertson described the triumph of the third exile. The third exile of Athanasius marks the summit of his achievement. Its commencement is the triumph, and its conclusion, the collapse of Arianism. The breakup of the Arian power was due to its lack of reality. As soon as it had a free hand, it began to go to pieces. But the watchful eye of Athanasius followed each step in the process from his hiding place. And the event was greatly due to his powerful personality and ready pen, knowing whom to overwhelm and whom to conciliate, where to strike and where to spare. His period then of forced abstention from affairs was the most stirring in spiritual and literary activity in the whole life of Athanasius. It produced more than half of his entire extant works. Let it be noted once for all how completely the amazing power wielded by the wandering fugitive was based upon the devoted fidelity of Egypt to its pastor. Towns and villages, deserts and monasteries, the very tombs were scoured by the imperial inquisitors in the search for Athanasius. But all in vain. Not once do we hear of any suspicion of betrayal. It pays to cultivate deep friendships in seasons of peace. He returned to Alexandria February 21, 362, having been gone for 6 years. Another irony about that is that he came back because Julian was now the emperor, and Julian was the first really pagan emperor in a long time, and he brought him back and undid all those banishments of Constantius. But that favor was very short-lived, and when Julian discovered what kind of saint he was dealing with, who didn't make a place for the gods, he also banished him into a fourth exile. And then he was brought back from that by a prophecy among the desert monks who on the very day that it happened predicted the death of Julian in Persia, hundreds of miles away, proved to be true, and Athanasius came back. And a few months later, 6 months later, he was driven out again. That only lasted a few months, and he came back February 1, 366, and then spent the rest of his days, 7 more years, loving his people, writing letters especially around the empire to solidify the cause. And he died May 2nd, 373. So what I want to do is draw out lessons from this. This is the part that I enjoy most. There isn't a lot of interesting detail to read about in Athanasius. I told you one interesting story. There are many of those. But what is powerful are the implications of his life and the implications of the dispute compared to our day. And that's where I want to go now. I have 7 of these. 7 lessons to learn. Number 1. Defending and explaining doctrine is for the sake of the gospel of Christ's glory and our everlasting joy. I changed the title from what was in the original brochure. I got that title because I didn't know I was going to run into this phrase. He wrote in one of his letters, "Wherefore, considering that this struggle is for our all, let us also make earnest care and aim to guard what we have received." And that phrase, contending for our all, gripped me. There was no fight here for ecclesiastical power going on. There was no fight here, in his case anyway, for theological triumph. This was a deeply religious crisis involving the reality of revelation and redemption. We are contending for our all. Everything is at stake. And oh, how thankful we should be that Athanasius saw things so clearly. The incarnation and the deity of Christ has